The year is 1941. In the minds of the veteran pilots of the German Luftwaffe, there was no finer fighter aircraft in the world than the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf FW 190. They were single-engine, fast, heavily armed, and prized for their superb maneuverability and high rate of climb. German fighter doctrine was built entirely around the superiority of the single-engine interceptor. Twin-engine aircraft, in their view, were destined to be slow, clumsy bombers or heavy fighters, Zerstorer, easily outmaneuvered and dispatched by a skilled ace. The very idea of a successful twin-engine pursuit fighter was dismissed as an expensive, complicated folly, a clear sign of American industrial excess over combat efficiency. When the first reports of a new American twin-engine fighter began trickling into German intelligence, the pilots scoffed. Its official designation, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, was often lost beneath the Luftwaffe's sardonic nickname, der Gabelschwanz-Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. The Germans couldn't grasp the revolutionary genius of the P-38's design. Created by the legendary Clarence Kelly Johnson at Lockheed, the Lightning was essentially built around its engines. Its defining features were unlike anything else flying: a central fuselage pod for the pilot and armament, and twin booms housing the Allison V-1710 engines connected by a high tailplane. In the early encounters over Iceland and the North Atlantic in late 1941 and early 1942, the P-38 was still wrestling with serious operational issues. Its sophisticated design suffered from teething problems, including severe propeller vibrations, electrical faults, and the dreaded compressibility stall at high speeds, a phenomenon the pilots initially didn't understand, causing the controls to lock up in a dive. These early operational losses, often caused by technical failures rather than combat, fueled the contempt of the Luftwaffe Aces. It was obvious that these American industrialists did not understand the fundamentals of air combat. The Lightning was a flying office, too large, too heavy, too complicated. It was a Zerstorer trying to play the part of a fighter. But what the Germans failed to appreciate were the fundamental, revolutionary advantages hidden beneath the unconventional skin. The unconventional advantages. 1. Concentrated nose firepower. Unlike the Bf 109 and FW 190, which relied on a combination of cowl and wing-mounted guns, leading to issues with convergence, where the bullets only meet at a specific range, the Lightning's armament was all packed into the nose pod. This meant the pilot was delivering a devastating, concentrated torrent of fire. Usually one 20mm cannon and 4 .50 caliber machine guns, aimed straight down the center line regardless of range. In a head-on pass, the Lightning was arguably the deadliest aircraft in the sky. 2. Twin-engine survivability and power. The German Aces had learned to target the single engine of Allied fighters. If the engine stopped, the plane was usually doomed. The P-38 fundamentally negated this tactical doctrine. If a German pilot managed to put a burst into one of the P-38's Allison engines, the pilot had a high chance of feathering the propeller and nursing the plane home on the remaining engine. This level of damage tolerance and twin-engine survivability was completely unexpected. It would prove infuriating to German pilots who were used to seeing their targets drop after a solid hit. Furthermore, its design allowed it to carry significantly more internal fuel and external drop tanks than its single-engine contemporaries. This gave the P-38 an exceptional operational range, enabling it to escort bombers deep into German-held territory, a task that was logistically impossible for early versions of the P-47 Thunderbolt or the P-51 Mustang before it received the Merlin engine. When the P-38 finally deployed in large numbers to the vast, geographically dispersed theaters of North Africa and the Mediterranean in late 1942, the German scorn began to curdle into confusion.
They found themselves facing a fighter that wouldn't die, could hit with terrifying precision in a head-on pass, and could chase them higher and further than they ever thought an American aircraft could go. The initial dismissal was about to cost the Luftwaffe dearly. The war was about to transition from one of individual maneuverability to one of endurance, range, and concentrated firepower, and the German pilots were dangerously unprepared for the revolutionary machine the Americans had unleashed.
The dismissive arrogance of the Luftwaffe was a luxury they could only afford while the P-38 remained a distant, rare curiosity. That changed abruptly and catastrophically in November 1942 with Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. Suddenly, hundreds of P-38 Lightnings, initially the P-38F and P-38G models, poured into the dusty, scorching airfields of Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. They were there to escort the vast transport fleets, protect ground troops, and, most critically, challenge the dominant German air superiority that had ruled the Mediterranean skies for 2 years. The Mediterranean theater became the crucible where the P-38's true nature was forged, and the German Aces' assumptions began to disintegrate. It was a theater of extremes, low-level dogfights over the desert dunes and high-altitude battles against supply-laden transport planes flying over the Atlas Mountains. The initial engagements were confusing for the veteran German pilots. Men who had flown against the Spitfire and the Hurricane, fighters that offered a predictable balance of speed versus turning ability, suddenly faced an opponent that seemed to defy the known rules of combat. The problem of the twin engine. The first major jolt to the Luftwaffe's doctrine was the P-38's unflinching survivability. German pilots, accustomed to a quick kill on a single-engine fighter by puncturing the oil or coolant systems, found themselves hammering the Lightning with prolonged bursts only to watch it continue its flight. The twin-engine design, which the Germans had mocked as a liability, proved to be its greatest asset. If a 20mm cannon shell took out one of the Allison V-1710s, the pilot could hit the feathering button, eliminate the drag of the dead propeller, and use the remaining engine to limp back to base. Quote overlay. Franz Schiess, German ace in North Africa. We would hit them squarely, see the smoke and the fire from the engine nacelle, and expect them to peel off and crash. But they simply kept going. It was unnatural. It went against everything we knew about damaging an aircraft. It was infuriating to put a perfect shot into the heart of the beast and watch the devil fly home. This survivability directly affected the morale and confidence of the German interceptors. A dogfight that normally ended with an Allied crash was now often inconclusive, forcing the German pilot to break off and expend precious ammunition, knowing the P-38 would return tomorrow. The altitude and dive advantage. The terrain of North Africa and the Mediterranean often necessitated high-altitude escort for bomber missions or high-speed interception dives. Here, the P-38's design truly excelled. At altitudes above 20,000 feet, the P-38's dual-turbo superchargers gave the Allison engines a massive power advantage. Where the supercharged Daimler-Benz engines of the Bf-109 and FW-190 began to lose punch in the thin air, the P-38 kept accelerating. German pilots quickly discovered that if a Lightning started a dive from altitude, it was virtually impossible to catch. The P-38 was built for speed, and its inherent heavy structure meant it could withstand high G-forces in a steep, high-speed plunge. While the German aces knew how to use the Messerschmitt's diving ability, they were shocked by the sheer raw speed the P-38 could maintain at high altitude and in a power dive. This advantage allowed the P-38 pilots to dictate the terms of engagement. They could choose to zoom in, hit hard with their concentrated nose armament, and then use their superior speed in the dive to escape any retaliatory maneuver. The debut of the cannon barrage.
The final terrifying realization for the German pilots was the overwhelming lethality of the P-38's nose-mounted firepower. Prior to the Lightning, German pilots were accustomed to engaging American fighters that used the shotgun pattern of wing-mounted guns. These required careful range estimation to ensure the converging bullets hit the target effectively. The P-38 eliminated this variable. Its battery of one 20mm cannon and 4 heavy 50-caliber machine guns mounted directly on the center line of the aircraft meant that every bullet and shell traveled straight ahead. This created a highly dense cone of fire with a tremendous impact at any range the pilot chose to open fire. German aces who dared to engage the Lightning in a head-on pass, a tactic they often used successfully against other Allied fighters, found themselves instantly vaporized. The sudden catastrophic damage inflicted by the P-38's burst was unprecedented. Quote overlay. Johannes Steinhoff, reflecting on North Africa. The Americans would not turn, they would simply bore straight through your attack with that incredible cone of fire. We learned very quickly that in a head-on engagement, the forked-tailed devil held the advantage. If you were committed to that pass, you were committed to a very quick death. The new German warning. By the spring of 1943, the daily combat reports reaching Luftwaffe Command in Tunis and Sicily no longer contained snide remarks about the flying office. Instead, they contained urgent warnings and revised operational memos. The Luftwaffe was forced to fundamentally revise its tactical advice when fighting the P-38. Never engage head-on. Avoid the P-38's centerline firepower at all costs. Exploit the roll rate. Attack during sharp turns. The P-38's ailerons and long wingspan made its roll rate relatively sluggish compared to the snap roll capability of the FW-190. Use the split S. After an attack, the Germans were advised to use a tight, low-altitude split S maneuver to escape, as the P-38's heavy weight made it less adept at sustained close-in turning fights at low speed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a grudging tactical respect born from the loss of valuable comrades. The P-38 had effectively ended the single-engine dogma of the Luftwaffe and heralded a new era of air combat where range, altitude performance, and concentrated firepower outweighed tight turning capability. The German aces now knew the forked-tailed devil was not a clumsy Zersteuer. It was a highly lethal, long-range predator they could no longer afford to underestimate.
By mid-1943, the bitter experiences over North Africa and Sicily had forced the Luftwaffe to abandon its condescending view of the P-38. The dismissals were replaced by grudging respect, and tactical commanders began issuing stringent operational directives to counter the fork-tailed devil. This segment explores the specific technical realities of the P-38, its engineering triumphs in firepower and altitude performance that necessitated this profound tactical revolution within the German fighter corps. The heart of the P-38's threat lay not just in its unique appearance, but in two fundamental engineering decisions that directly challenged the German philosophy of aerial combat: the centralization of its armament and its revolutionary high-altitude power plant configuration. The tyranny of the centerline firepower. The most immediate and devastating lesson for the Luftwaffe concerned the P-38's armament. German and British fighters, designed to conserve weight and maximize wing structure integrity, traditionally mounted their weapons in the wings. This presented a complex geometry problem, convergence. To ensure bullets from the left wing and the right wing actually hit the target, pilots had to set a specific point, usually between 250 and 400 yards, where the trajectories would converge. If the engagement happened outside this narrow zone, the shot was ineffective. The P-38 bypassed this limitation entirely. By cramming all of its weapons, typically one Hispano M2 20mm cannon and 4 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns into the central cockpit nacelle, the P-38 achieved centerline fire. This meant the bullet trajectories were virtually parallel, forming an incredibly dense, concentrated cone of fire that remained effective and lethal from point-blank range out to significantly greater distances than a wing-mounted battery could manage. Pilot testimony. Focus, Luftwaffe ace Franz Stigler, reflecting on the P-38. You see the muzzle flashes, and suddenly your world is gone. There is no spread. There is no warning. It was like being hit by a single, massive shell, not a spray of bullets. You could not maneuver out of that cone of fire once you were in his sights. This concentrated punch had several profound effects on German tactics. Elimination of head-on passes. Previously, a head-on pass was a dangerous but often decisive maneuver where a skilled German pilot could use speed to survive. Against the P-38, it became suicide. The sheer volume and parallel trajectory of the P-38's fire meant that the chance of instantly destroying the German engine or vaporizing the cockpit was exceptionally high. Increased lethality at range. P-38 pilots learned they could open fire effectively at longer ranges, often before the German pilot realized he was in danger. This forced Luftwaffe pilots to delay their attack runs and approach from angles that sacrificed their tactical advantage. The altitude engine advantage. The second engineering triumph was the P-38's power plant, 2 liquid-cooled Allison V1710 engines, each equipped with a crucial element housed in the tail booms, the General Electric turbo supercharger. While German fighters like the Bf-109 relied on mechanical superchargers integrated directly into the engine, which delivered excellent power at low to medium altitudes, the P-38's turbo superchargers, powered by the engine's exhaust gases, were far more efficient at high altitudes. Above 25,000 feet, where the air thinned out and the performance of most German fighters dropped significantly, the P-38 was just hitting its stride. It maintained excellent horsepower, enabling it to climb faster and fly at sustained high speeds. This high-altitude superiority was critical for 2 main roles: long-range escort. As the war progressed, American bomber raids ventured deeper into Germany. The P-38 was one of the first fighters capable of providing escort all the way to the target, flying high above the German interception forces, ready to pounce. Energy advantage. German pilots were forced to attack the P-38 and its bomber formations from below, bleeding energy to climb to meet the escort. The P-38 pilots, starting from a position of superior altitude, could use classic boom and zoom tactics with devastating effect, converting altitude into speed for a slashing attack and then zooming back up to safety. The Luftwaffe's forced tactical revision. The accumulation of these technical realities, the concentrated firepower, and the high-altitude performance forced the Luftwaffe to abandon their traditional maneuver-based, close-quarters dogfight philosophy when engaging the Lightning. The new directives focused on minimizing exposure and exploiting the P-38's few weaknesses, primarily its inferior roll rate. Avoid the vertical. German pilots were taught to keep the fight horizontal. If the P-38 gained altitude superiority, the German pilot was to exit the engagement immediately. Exploit the roll. The P-38's long wingspan and heavy engines made its roll rate, how fast it could rotate along its longitudinal axis, slower than the nimble FW-190. German pilots were instructed to initiate sudden, hard-rolling turns after an engagement, knowing the P-38 would struggle to track them accurately through that maneuver. The dive zoom trap counter. While the P-38 was a superior diver, the Germans learned that immediately pulling up after the dive often created a momentary blind spot and loss of energy for the P-38, providing a chance for the German fighter to escape or retaliate.
The P-38 Lightning, initially dismissed as a clumsy American blunder, became the primary catalyst forcing the tactical revolution within the German fighter corps. It proved that sheer engineering and specialized performance, high altitude, long range, and devastating firepower could overcome the traditional emphasis on pure close-in maneuverability. The German Aces had encountered a technological predator, and the fear it instilled was now deeply rooted in their combat doctrine.
The grudging respect the Luftwaffe developed for the P-38 in the Mediterranean was nothing compared to the shock delivered by the Lightning's performance in the vast, unforgiving expanses of the Pacific theater. While the theaters were thousands of miles apart and fought by different adversaries, one single dramatic mission, Operation Vengeance, served as the ultimate chilling proof of the P-38's revolutionary capabilities. It was a mission that resonated across all theaters, providing a tangible, symbolic reason for the German designation of the P-38 as the fork-tailed devil. The impossible mission. By early 1943, the Japanese Navy's most brilliant strategist and the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, Fleet Admiral Yamamoto, was still the dominant figure guiding the war in the Pacific. Allied codebreakers at Station Hypo in Hawaii, however, achieved a stunning victory. They intercepted and decrypted a highly secret message detailing the Admiral's exact itinerary for a frontline inspection tour on April 18, 1943. The challenge presented to the USAAF was audacious: assassinate Yamamoto. The location of the interception was the island of Bougainville, over 400 miles, 640 kilometers from the nearest operational American base at Kukum Field on Guadalcanal. The round trip, flying around Japanese-held islands to avoid detection, was calculated to be over 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers. This was, for the technology of the time, an impossible fighter mission. The Spitfire, the P-40, and even the early versions of the P-47 Thunderbolt simply did not possess the required range. The P-51 Mustang, which would later dominate the European skies, had not yet been deployed in force with its essential Merlin engine. The P-38, the only answer. The task fell to the long-range Predator, the Lockheed P-38G Lightning of the 339th Fighter Squadron. The P-38 was the only fighter in the Allied inventory capable of such a feat, solely because of the combination of its twin engines and its ability to carry massive external drop tanks. The pilots selected for the mission were equipped with modified P-38Gs, which took off with two huge 165-gallon drop tanks slung beneath their wings, and executed a grueling, precisely timed, four-legged navigational flight plan designed to keep them low to the water, often wave-hopping at 50 feet or less, to evade Japanese radar and observation posts along the Solomon Chain. The flight was calculated down to the minute, leaving absolutely no margin for error or navigational miscalculation over the vast, empty ocean. The mission itself was an extreme test of the P-38's endurance and its navigation system, proving its capability as a tactical weapon of strategic reach. Range and endurance. The P-38 flew for over 2 hours and 30 minutes, maintaining absolute radio silence, consuming fuel reserves over water that would have doomed any single-engine fighter if an engine failed. The twin-engine reliability, often derided by the Germans, was the foundation of the mission's viability. Timing and precision. The pilots reached the interception point over Bougainville at 9:34 a.m., almost precisely the minute predicted by the decrypted itinerary, catching Yamamoto's two Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers and their Zero escort as they descended for landing. The kill and the symbolic aftermath. The impact of this single kill was monumental, both strategically and psychologically.
In the Pacific, Yamamoto's death was a crushing blow to Japanese morale and leadership, effectively confirming the devastating reach and sophistication of American military intelligence and air power. It proved that nowhere was safe, even high-ranking military leaders deep behind the front lines. In Europe, the German realization. While the mission was against the Japanese, the news filtered back to the Luftwaffe High Command. They understood the logistics: a 1,000-mile round trip, long-range escort, precision navigation, and the execution of a strategic kill. This single operation validated every fear the German pilots had begun to articulate in the Mediterranean. The P-38 was not just a fighter, it was a long-range strategic weapon capable of striking at the nerve center of the enemy command. The despised twin-engine design was in fact the key to unprecedented operational reach, transforming the character of the air war. The mission cemented the P-38's image as the predator without limits. It flew too far, too fast, and hit too hard. The sheer audacity and successful execution of Operation Vengeance proved beyond any doubt that the P-38 was a revolutionary, deadly machine. It was the ultimate, irrefutable evidence that the Luftwaffe's initial dismissal of the fork-tailed devil was a dangerous strategic error that would cost them air superiority in the European skies as the Lightning, now a known quantity of lethal capability, began to fly deeper and deeper into the Reich.
By 1944, the tide had unequivocally turned. The P-38 Lightning, once the butt of Luftwaffe jokes, was now a constant, menacing presence across every theater. Its revolutionary capabilities, proven in the desperate skies over North Africa and cemented by the strategic audacity of Operation Vengeance, had forced a permanent and costly shift in German air tactics and resources. This final segment explores the enduring respect the German Aces held for the P-38, its critical roles in the final years of the war, and its lasting legacy in shaping the future of fighter design. The new role: deep penetration and reconnaissance. As the war entered its final phases, the P-38 took on roles that leveraged its unique combination of speed, altitude, and range. Long-range photo reconnaissance, F-5 variant. Stripping the P-38 of its nose armament and replacing it with high-definition cameras created the F-5 Lightning. This variant became the eyes of the Allied High Command, flying deep into the heart of the heavily defended German Reich. The F-5 flew so high and so fast that it was virtually untouchable, bringing back intelligence critical to targeting industrial sites and V-weapon development centers. For the Luftwaffe, this was perhaps the most frustrating role of all, witnessing a single, unarmed aircraft penetrate their airspace at will, knowing they couldn't catch or shoot it down. Long-range escort. The arrival of the Merlin-engined P-51 Mustang provided competition, but the P-38 maintained its essential role in escorting the immense B-17 and B-24 bomber streams on missions that required the maximum possible time over the target. Its reputation alone kept German interceptors wary, often forcing them to commit to disadvantageous attacks from below. The final grudging respect. The initial contempt had morphed into a professional, profound respect. The surviving German aces, those who had successfully adapted their tactics to survive the fork-tailed devil, spoke of it with a mix of frustration and admiration. The P-38's high-speed performance and ability to absorb damage were the qualities most cited by the Germans. Aces like Johannes Steinhoff and Franz Stigler, who survived the war, became advocates of a new reality. Air combat was no longer solely about agility, it was about energy, speed, and survivability. Quote overlay, Johannes Steinhoff, reflecting post-war. We dismissed the P-38 because it was not a traditional dogfighter. That was our mistake. It was a fighter designed for the new war, a war of distance and altitude. It forced us to think in terms of speed and energy, not just turning circles. It was one of the most dangerous opponents we faced.
The P-38's influence was even reflected in later war designs. The urgency to counter the twin-boom fighter's advantages led to the development of higher-performance German designs like the TA-152 and the development of specialized high-altitude variants of the Bf-109, trying desperately to match the P-38's performance above 30,000 feet. The enduring legacy. The P-38 concluded its service with a highly distinguished record. It accounted for more Japanese aircraft destroyed than any other USAF fighter in the Pacific, and its pilots, most famously Major